Civilians, non-combatants, have always been the victims of other people's wars, and since the invention of bows and arrows, they've suffered indiscriminate killing from the sky. For all the imagery of soldiers engaged in trench warfare, millions of civilians were killed across Europe between 1914 and 1918. New developments in science and technology, flying machines, raised the prospect of even more civilians perishing in the future. One of the lessons of the first decade or so of the 20th century was that an uncontrolled arms race made war more likely. The post-war Treaty of Versailles, 1919, included provision for a disarmament conference to make sure that an arms race between the world's most powerful countries never happened again. A key factor would be limiting the power of the aerial bomber. The victorious nations were quick to punish Germany after the war, but slow to consider any disarmament that might involve themselves doing anything. Eventually, at the start of the 1930s, disarmament conferences did begin. In 1933, the discussion turned to air defence. The only safe way forward for the world would be a complete ban on the use of air bombing in war. Could there really be a global ban on the bomber? It looked for a while as though that might really happen. Only one nation stood out, determined to keep bombing people: Imperial Britain. Unfortunately, Stanley Baldwin, the Conservative Prime Minister, was an enthusiastic supporter of air bombing, arguing that there could be no defence against the bomber, and that you have to kill more women and children more quickly than the enemy if you want to save yourself. Lord Londonderry, the Secretary of State for Air and Britain's representatives at the Geneva disarmament talks, said he had the utmost difficulty amidst the public outcry in preserving the use of the bombing aeroplane. He was proud to resist calls for disarmament. In particular, he demanded that air bombing for police purposes in certain outlying districts should be exempted from abolition. In other words, Britain needed to bomb people in order to keep down rebellion in its empire, especially people in the inaccessible mountainous terrain of the northwest frontier of India, today the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, who refused to succumb to their imperial invaders. Britain rejected the 1933 moves to ban aerial bombing in order to bomb people along the northwest frontier. Not long ago, Britain was bombing their descendants yet again, and British drones controlled from Lincolnshire are still primed to strike not far away. The 1933 air disarmament proposal fell, and a new arms race began. The 1930s peace movement protested against the cold-blooded declaration of the British representative at Geneva. When other nations had agreed to forego aerial bombing, for Britain to continue doing it was dangerous to the morale of the world, said some protesters, a threat to the moral basis of civilization. The policy made no practical sense, said others, as an island nation is far more vulnerable from the air than from the land or even the sea. As ever, the peace movement was right. A mere 7 years later, bombs were raining down on England. The government that had resisted disarmament had created the conditions that helped to bring about the Blitz. No wonder that Vera Brittain later commented that the horrific bombing of civilians in Hiroshima and Nagasaki lay in the logic of history. If only they'd listened to the peace movement.